Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Bigfoot Report. Guys, I would love to tell you that Tiffany and I have a few more encounters that we would like to share with you, but that wouldn't be entirely accurate this go around because it's just Tiffany. Tiffany has compiled several little encounter stories and wanted to share them with you. She got on and recorded them and did a great job. And I know you guys are going to enjoy them. All right, guys. I know that you're ready. Miss Tiffany is ready. I'm just taking it easy on this one. Sit back, relax. Let's get started.
The night was cold, and the wind was blowing hard across the side of my house, rattling my windows. I hate winter and couldn't wait for those first warm moments of the spring, for the long nights and even longer conversations that I have missed having with my friends. I was also sure that whatever this man-beast was wouldn't be so apt to find his way to my place looking for food, nor would he want to. I know, I got ahead of myself. Let me back up some. I moved out here on my own when I was only 19 years old. For context, I'm almost 23 now. I had learned a lot from my folks in living off-grid, surrounded by nature, and they made it appear so easy. I guess I still had a lot to learn. The first year was great, though. I had made a lot of progress and knew that this was perfect, ideal habitat for me. I was thankful for everything I had gleaned from my parents. Then I learned something for myself the hard way. The only one thing they never taught me about was this ravenous, ape-like thing that walked on two legs. Yeah, I know. I assure you I'm not crazy. I'm not on drugs. And I only drink on the rare occasion that me and my friends get together to BS around the fire. But we haven't had the guts to do that since we encountered this bipedal thing. I don't know what else to call it. I guess Bigfoot? My dad and I built this place like Fort Knox, but I was still apprehensive that I would even be safe after seeing that. I've heard every sound that nature has to offer. Bobcat screams, deer gruffs, birds, frogs, you name it. Most sound ominous in the dark, no matter how innocent they may be. But this night, we would all hear something new, something dark, something we knew just didn't belong. My friends and I were sitting around the roaring flames, just shooting the breeze and drinking beer. Typical stuff, but about an hour or so after being out there, my friend told me he heard something walking behind us. It had just started to get the fall feeling in the air. Light breezes that would send shivers up your spine, and then the leaves had begun to fall. I still had plenty of cover on the trees surrounding my house to shroud things in mystery, but the crunching of the leaves gave whatever this was he heard away. We all quit talking and turned down the music we had on in the background. That's when we all heard it. Walking. Something was walking on 2 feet. This definitely wasn't a quadruped. This was bipedal, and it was heavy, whatever it was. We all sat in a hushed silence. I was trying my hardest to figure out what this was, and they had all started to look at me for answers since I'm the one who lives here. I should know everything that lives with me in the forest, but unfortunately, I had no answer to give the questions their expressions were asking. I blurted out the only thing I knew would be even remotely reasonable, even though I doubted it in my own mind. A bear. It has to be a bear. They are known to walk on 2 feet, at least in short distances anyway. I knew, though, that this was not walking any short distances, and it was beginning to circle us. We had narrowed down by sound that it was either one walking really fast, or the not so positive answer of the group to the noise surrounding us. There were two, maybe more. I had no idea. That's when the sound came, a low rumble that vibrated through all of us. It had to have been working this growl up from the bottom of its feet. The roar exploded from its throat. My friends scattered to their cars sitting nearby, screaming, "That ain't no bear." And two other of my friends ran into my house. I was left there alone, holding my beer. I was afraid to run as the others had. I wanted to so bad, but it felt like my feet were planted to the ground with cement. I had visions of this beast bursting through the trees and attacking me. I strained to see through the smoke and flames through to the trees. That's when I saw its outline. This thing was tall. The fire lit up then just enough to where I could see clearly for only a few seconds as a piece of wood was snapped by the fire. That is all I needed. It looked like a really tall gorilla. A black gorilla. Its eyes shone an iridescent amber color as it opened its mouth. I waited for another explosive roar, but it stood there silent, making eye contact with me. All I could do was hope that it ran away. I was pissed that I had been left there by my friends. None of that mattered, though. I felt deep down I was toast. I was only hoping that when they explained what had happened to me, that someone would believe them. Just then, a car horn blared obnoxiously, breaking the foreboding silence. My buddy stuck his head out of the car window and yelled obscenities at this thing, all the while holding down that atrocious horn. I heard the other one of these things from behind me. It was running away. The sound of the leaves crunching brought peace. Now I just had the one in front of me to deal with. I was still going to lose this battle, and I knew it. But at least it was just the one. A sharp howl rang out and could be heard over the horn from behind me. The face of this, whatever I was looking at, softened. It huffed at me as if to say, "We're not finished here." And then it closed its mouth. I was shaking. I had no idea what to expect. Then it took off in the opposite direction, crunching leaves as it ran. I stood there for about 10 to 15 minutes in the silence, with only the crackling of the fire making noise as it slowly started to fizzle out. My buddy walked over with a flashlight and pointed it at the wood line where this thing was standing, and then behind me, too. Nothing. They were gone. I breathed a sigh of relief as I felt my heart rate begin to slow and realized at that time that I had pissed my pants. My body was so stiff from fear. I had also crushed my beer can. I felt like I was going to faint. It was the aftermath of that adrenaline dump, no doubt. The days and weeks following that event, I bought a sturdier place for my chickens, and I made sure I was inside well before dark. I had plenty of firepower and ammunition, but I have to be honest, I don't know if it would even stop that thing. It was so massive in size and in height. I still suffer from nightmares to this day, even though it's been a few years. It seems like every winter these things come around, and I don't know why. Am I living in what used to be their sole territory? Are they tempted by the chickens? Worse yet, is it me that they want? I chose this place because of the livability, wide open areas for the garden, a good place near the house for chickens, a creek nearby for water. It was perfect. Now, every winter, I question my decision and wonder if it was the best one. I talked to my dad about it, and, well, you already know how that conversation went. We haven't ever experienced anything like that, and if we had, you would know about it, was what he said. Then he went on with questioning whether or not I should just move out of the wilderness to a city somewhere. I understand there's wildlife. I grew up with them. But apes that walk on 2 feet? That was a new one for me. But I don't think I could bring myself to move to a cement city. Out here, I do at least have freedom. Until the winter, that is. I don't know if you can use this or not. If you do, I appreciate it. I think there's more to these things than one's own imagination. I did end up making up with my buddies, although I do still rib them from time to time about leaving me to face this thing alone. Thank you for all that you do. I enjoy all of the shows. Keep up the good work. It was the month of July, 2009, in Fairbanks, Alaska. I was heading south on Auburn Drive toward Farmer's Loop, which was about a mile away. It is a wooded area frequented by homes and in general would be considered a populated area. Houses are on an average about 100 to 200 feet apart, with only the general area around and close to the homes cleared out. Most of the area by far is wooded. It was the section of the road where it passes by Pearl Creek Elementary School. The school can be seen through the woods. Some of the woods in the area are quite thick and in some places can't be seen into more than about 10 or 15 feet. But in this area, it had apparently been cleaned out quite a bit, and sight lines into the section of the siding were very open. The school and vegetable garden could be seen off to the right from the road I was on. It was about 6 p.m., and I was heading home after a day of working on a deck that I was building. The weather was clear with the sun high in the sky. As I was driving, I happened to notice a quote-unquote man standing by the right side of the road about 100 yards ahead. It was more of an unconscious recognition. There's nothing unusual about a man standing on the side of the road in this area. As I got to within about 50 yards, I looked closer. That's no man, I said to myself. I was alone in the car. Shortly after that, 1 or 2 seconds, he bolted into the woods toward the school. He did it like a wild animal would do if spooked. I didn't slow down until I got to the place where I saw him go into the woods, which is where I stopped. I could see him running away from the road, and when he was into the woods about 30 yards or so, he turned left and was now running parallel to the road in the same direction I was heading. I got a good look at him, but not his face. I could have probably seen his face had I not been so mesmerized and had the presence of mind to look at it. I was busy noticing other things. His fur, or hair, looked to be about 3 to 4 inches all over the main part of his body. It was a reddish, rusty color. I was mildly struck by how red it was, but it definitely had some rustiness to it. He was about 6 feet tall and looked to weigh about 200 pounds. He ran with a strange, hoppy kind of run. I watched him until he disappeared into the woods. There was a road about 100 yards ahead, and I took off to get to it so I could turn right and in 20 yards turn right again to the road that seemingly had to be in there somewhere. The woods I was looking into from that angle were quite thick, and I didn't see him and haven't seen him since. A little farther up on the right was the school garden that had people in it, around 7 to 10, which I'm now sorry I didn't stop to go talk to them about it. The next day, as I was driving into work on the deck, I naturally slowed down in the area I had seen him. I stopped, actually, and was surveying the area when a couple walking their dogs were approaching. I flagged them down and told them the story of what happened the evening prior. And they had told me that about a week before they were with their dogs and were on the way other side of the school property by the soccer field, and 3 kids came running over to them saying, "Did you see the Sasquatch? Did you see the Sasquatch?" They also said that what appeared to be a dad was with them, who didn't seem too excited about it. My conclusion to whether it was real or not is summed up by saying it was either real or there was a man in a very, very convincing costume. I reported it to the Fish and Game office in Fairbanks a couple days later. The person who was taking the report was sort of rolling his eyes through the whole thing as he seemed to be writing it down on a piece of scrap paper. I even asked him to take my phone number just in case. This particular incident occurred when I was young, approximately 27 years ago. Due to the age of this report, I doubt it will be of much research value. However, do not dismiss this as a child's fantasy. I was 7 to 8 years old, but I remember it in explicit detail. I have experienced one other possible contact myself other than the one I am reporting now, but I will wait to see if anyone is interested. As I said, I was approximately 7 to 8 years old at the time. I had heard of Bigfoot before and seen pictures on TV, but hadn't ever seen one before. My neighbor, who was a year older than me, was spending the night. We were in my bedroom on the second floor of my parents' home around 2 o'clock. We had not yet gone to sleep and decided to raid the icebox and went downstairs to the kitchen. The living room kitchen area is one big room sectioned off in the middle by a counter. I went into the living room and turned on the pole light, which was right beside one of the large living room windows. The light, being right next to the window, would illuminate a large part of the backyard. Since we had no exterior floodlights, we often played late at night in the backyard using the light from that window. When I turned the light on, perhaps more out of habit than anything else, I took a quick glance into the yard. What I saw was a very large, dark brown, hairy creature. It was visible in the light for only a few seconds, as it was walking away from the house and eventually out of the light. Both my friend and I saw it, and we ran for the bedroom and stayed there until morning. I never told my parents about it, and I have mentioned it to several friends over the years in conversation, and they have all laughed about it. I estimate the creature to have been about 8 to 9 feet tall. I gauged this by the height of an oak tree that the creature walked by, within 8 to 10 feet of, which my dad and I had transplanted there. The tree was around 15 feet tall, and the creature was approximately 2/3 of that height. The physical dimensions of the creature were enormous. I had never seen anything like it. I had seen apes at the zoo, but this was nothing like that. The arms, shoulders, and especially the legs were 2 to 3 times the size of any appendages that I'd ever seen. Very muscular. The entire creature was covered in dark fur, not matted, but not furry. The arms were very long, and although the creature walked upright, the hands, as the creature walked, hung almost to its knees. There was no break in the fur from the head through the neck to its back. It was just one solid piece of fur. The neck was larger in width than the head, which gave it a triangular shape from the top of the head to the shoulders. When the light came on, it somewhat startled the creature as it turned around to look my way, but did not break stride as it walked out of the light. However, when it turned, it did not just turn its head as you would expect, but somewhat turned its entire upper body from the chest up. It was quite common for us neighborhood kids to sleep outside during the summer, but it was several years before we went to do that again. In the morning, I walked out into the yard to where the creature had walked through. There were large impressions in the grass that went down to the dirt. Not very deep, but enough to leave a depression. I have no idea of the length or width, just that 2 of my feet would fit inside sideways and front to back. Also, I could not jump from one step to the next. The stride was far too long. My friend and I were sitting on his truck tailgate, parked in my parents' driveway, looking at stars and laughing and talking. Very clear night with bright moonlight, rare for Washington. The truck was about 20 feet from State Highway 7. A crabapple tree had grown on the edge of the property, practically hanging out in the road. The farm my family lived on was surrounded by trees, and we could constantly hear the wind run through them. But we heard a different type of tree movement from the crabapple tree by the highway, and it caught our attention. It sounded like something pushing the branches in and fruit snapping off. We got off the truck and walked towards the tree. When we were about 15 feet from the tree, the noise stopped. Then we saw it, a large, pale animal upright on 2 legs. It paid us little mind as it jogged out from behind the tree and loped across the highway with a swish, swish, swish sound from its feet. It sounded like someone rubbing 2 pieces of sandpaper together. I was transfixed by the legs. They remained so straight and took such long strides. The left arm swung in huge, deliberate strokes, and other than the feet swishing, we heard no noise. No labored breathing, creaky joints, nothing. The visual portion was as follows. Pale-colored, not brown at all. In fact, it was almost a dirty white color. The long, slender limbs were not fat or bulky. The hair on the legs seemed to be around 5 or 6 inches long and swung back and forth while the leg was in motion. It definitely had a hand, which swung in large, forceful movements. It was hanging on to what I believed to be my parents' crabapple. We were unable to move for what seemed like hours, but must have been only a few seconds. It continued down the highway, and when we came to our heads, in nervous excitement, we ran for the truck and turned the cab headlights on. Too late. It was out of sight. We ran inside, grabbed flashlights, and after trying to explain to my family what we had just seen and what happened, we ended up dragging half of them out into the woods and the animal's last known direction of travel. Needless to say, we heard and found nothing. The next day, tracks could be found, although they were not the type you would expect. They were scuffs of tracks from the animal where it dragged its feet, not the clear, easily identifiable tracks you see on TV. The crabapple tree had a significant section of broken branches, and 2 pieces of apple were found laying on the ground. The first incident dates back to around the summer of 1995. It has been a while, so I can't be completely sure of the exact dates. One of my older sisters and her 3 young daughters were out looking for a place to pick wild berries with my younger sister. There were blackberries in abundance there, which was kind of odd considering it was so close to the road, and there were many people out picking berries that time of year. They picked berries for just a few minutes when they began to feel uneasy, like there was someone watching them. The girls started to get scared, and one of them said it was a scary place, which was unusual since it was a nice summer day and the spot seemed pleasant enough down by the river. After a few moments, their uneasiness turned to outright fear, and they decided to waste no time in leaving. My younger sister related the events of the day to me when she got home that evening, and being curious about such things, we decided to make another trip out there the following day, so I could experience the oppressive atmosphere firsthand. We got a late start, so it was full dark when we arrived the next evening, but my sister, her husband, and myself were somewhat prepared, having bought flashlights and a point-and-shoot 35mm camera. It was a walk of about 300 yards from the side of the road to the river, and the going was made a bit difficult because of the downhill slope and the fact that it had rained a couple days earlier, and the track was all mud, quite deep in parts. We walked and slipped down to the edge of the riverbank and stopped to observe the area. It was very dark and seemed quite isolated, but other than that, it felt normal. No sense of impending doom, no unseen presence felt. We idled around there for about 10 minutes and were about to go home when all of a sudden there was a tremendous bang. It sounded very much like a shotgun at first, and we thought somebody was shooting at us. We ducked and began to make our way back to the car when we heard a very loud splashing just off the shore on our side of the river. It sounded to me like a cow or a large deer had fallen in and was struggling to swim. Being young and foolish, I thought this would make a very cool picture. So I made my way to the bank and was about to peer over the edge to get my shot when the thrashing ceased, and there was the very distinct sound of a large rock being thrown into the water. This was quickly followed by another, and soon another. I turned to my sister, and she said, "Oh my God, there's something throwing rocks." And by this time, her quote-unquote brave husband was already well on his way back up to the car at a dead run, and we were right on his heels in a mad panic, slipping and sliding up the dark hill. After a few moments, sanity returned to my sister, and she grabbed my arm and said, "Wait, listen." And we stopped a few yards up the track and listened. Now you may be wondering why the sound of some rocks being thrown in the water freaked us out so much. This area was quite desolate, and the river is very cold and deep, with eddies that could easily pull you under and drown you. The riverbank is quite steep, and it's an almost sheer 25-foot or so drop to the water, with no easy footing when the tide is in and the river is up. So anybody that would be crazy enough to stand out in the middle of nowhere in the dead of night by a dark, dangerous river and casually throw very large rocks into the water was not the kind of person we wanted to meet at that time. It just felt very wrong, and our instincts told us to leave now. Anyway, we stood there listening for a moment when my sister grabbed my arm again and yelled something to the effect of, "Oh my God, it's coming." And she ran off up the hill in a blind panic, and although I didn't see or hear anything, I decided to follow her. We made it up to the car, having slipped and fallen in the mud several times, and beat on the door for her husband to unlock it and let us in. We sat in the car for a few minutes gathering our wits and decided to get out and have another listen, since nothing seemed to have followed us up. We stayed close to the car this time and heard no more splashing at the river, but after a few moments we heard a single large branch snap in the woods off to our right. It was silent for a few moments, and we heard a soft rustling in the bush from the same area. I told my brother-in-law to throw a rock in that direction to see if we get any response, and he tossed a fairly sizable stone into the general area. and we heard a bit of commotion. I yelled, "Hello there," to make sure we weren't tossing rocks at a person, but got no answer. I then whistled and heard the strangest sound I had ever heard before or since. Whatever was in the bush attempted to mimic my whistle. It didn't blow air through its lips, but tried to vocalize it. I don't know how to describe it. It was somewhat high-pitched, but had very deep undertones, and you could tell this thing had some incredible lung capacity. It wasn't even straining, yet had a volume several times louder than my own. This disturbed us quite a bit, and we decided to leave. We returned the next night and brought 4 other people with us, and within a few minutes of darkness, it would get very quiet, and then the rock throwing would start. Sometimes on our side of the river, and sometimes on the other. We returned to the area several times with several different people and always heard something. I won't detail all the instances here, but will note some of the stranger occurrences. After about our 3rd visit there, we noticed a different phenomenon. Just after dark, we would hear the sound of large rocks being clicked together, usually starting on the far side of the river, and then answered with similar clicking from off in the woods on our side. Several times we tried to duplicate the sound, but it always sounded bigger and louder, no matter how large of the rocks we could bang together. Several times we heard snapping and rustling in the brush off to both sides. We went there in the daylight to look for anything unusual, but could find nothing out of the ordinary. One interesting note: we never seen nor heard anything unusual in the daylight. Even on bright moonlit nights, we often would hear nothing. My theory is this thing was nocturnal, and if there was even a remote possibility of seeing it, it would keep quiet. The only time anybody saw anything strange there was when my younger sister and I were left alone at the site for a few hours, waiting for our ride to return. We were standing at the riverbank, basically just enjoying the sunset, when my sister said, "Holy shit, it's Bigfoot," and pointed to the far bank. I looked where she was pointing, but was too late. It had already disappeared into the brush. My sister told me she was scanning a gravel bank we had just noticed earlier that day when a large black object she had assumed was a stump or a piece of log which had washed into the gravel suddenly stood up and took 3 quick steps towards the woods and was gone. The sun was almost down and the gravel bank was in deep shadows, so she could make out very little detail, but she said it was definitely not a cow or a bear. She said it walked on 2 legs, and she got the impression it was walking hunched over, and that it had no neck, and it had massive shoulders, and that the body seemed almost impossibly bulky. She said it moved very fast, like it knew we were there, and it was trying to sneak away. Apparently, it was bent over on the gravel bar for some time. She noticed it when she first looked that way, and it was several minutes before it got up and moved. She seemed quite shaken by the event, and it was a long wait while it got dark, us there alone with no way out and no hard car to hide in. I don't think we returned there after that. My sister moved back to Florida where her husband was stationed, and I got a job there driving trucks. I moved back to Washington a couple years ago, and last summer decided to return to the area to see if there was any activity. The first time I went back, I brought along another sister, her husband, and their 14-year-old son. We arrived at the site after dark again. I had trouble finding after such a long time. This was in the middle of July, and the moon was quite bright, and we hardly even needed our flashlights. We walked down to the riverbank, and I noticed how the place hadn't really changed at all over the years. We stood there for about half an hour listening to the frogs and other night critters and heard nor felt anything unusual. So we decided to leave. I had pretty much figured that whatever was down there back then had moved on, but I wasn't quite ready to give up. We returned the following weekend, and this time it was cloudy and pitch black. We walked down to the river once again and stood there talking for about 10 minutes when my nephew said, "Shh, listen." And we did and heard nothing. And I was about to say that I don't hear anything. It had suddenly gotten very quiet. All the frogs quit croaking, and the atmosphere felt dead calm. It began to feel very eerie, and then things happened so quickly, I have trouble recalling the exact events to this day. Two things happened almost simultaneously. We heard the yap of a single coyote, very close by, which was strange. They almost always travel in packs. Then we heard something very large, scrambling up the bank, no more than 20 feet away. We all began to run because whatever it was coming right towards us, and fast. I got a sudden case of the braves and said, "Don't run." Then heard very definite, heavy footsteps in the brush, no more than 10 feet away and still coming after us, and then said, "Okay, maybe jog." And we proceeded to hightail it up to the car. We sat in the blazer for a few minutes with the windows down listening and heard nothing further, but none of us wanted to walk back down to the river that night. The experience had me so fired up that I bought one of the new Sony Handycams with the night shot infrared systems the next weekend and was determined to get some evidence. We went out there that Saturday armed with my new video camera and stalked around until dark looking for tracks or anything until it started to get dark. We found nothing as the ground there is not conducive to track retention, being mostly gravel, weeds, or deep brush. It seemed to avoid the muddy track completely. We were at the riverbank just after dark when we heard a single loud splash, and then heavy steps and brush crashing as something made its way up the bank towards us. I should note that earlier that day, we climbed down the bank to the place it always seems to come from, and it was so rough and steep, it took us several minutes to make our way back up the bank, and that was keeping to the trail. This, however, always came through the heavy brush. My sister and nephew ran off towards the truck, and I walked quickly backwards, filming as I went, hoping to get video of it as it emerged from the brush. It stayed just within the brush and thus out of sight from me, and it stopped chasing me after I retreated about halfway up the hill. I was feeling very brave behind the lens and started to advance back toward it and heard two more heavy steps in my direction, and got the distinct impression that I should leave now. We got back in the truck and left, and I haven't returned since. My sister feels it's too dangerous to go back, and I won't go there alone. Whatever it is, it's very territorial. I get the feeling that it was charging us to get us out of the immediate area, and then when we got back to the vehicle, it was okay. The experiences I've had this time are much different than the first time. There was no rock splashing or rock clicking. I haven't been there since the first part of August of 1998, and would very much like to return to the site with somebody that has more experience in these things than I do.